Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're basically going to operate as your intelligence briefing. We are going to unpack the deep-rooted systems, the historical fractures, and frankly, the highly lucrative war economy that is driving the real-time collapse of Sudan. We're talking about a country of nearly 50 million people being torn apart, but as you'll see, this isn't just random chaos. It's a calculated, highly profitable system.
Here is the rundown for today's briefing. We're going to cover 1. A record humanitarian emergency. 2. Colonial roots of weaponized identity. 3. Two generals, two rival capitals. 4. The RSF business conglomerates. 5. The global gold smuggling network. And finally, 6. Foreign powers arming the conflict. Let's just dive right in.
Section 1. A record humanitarian emergency. Now, we absolutely have to start our analysis with the staggering fallout this conflict is having on civilians.
I really want you to let this number sink in for a second. 25.6 million. Over half of Sudan's entire population is currently expected to face high levels of acute food insecurity. What we're witnessing right now is literally the largest humanitarian crisis ever recorded. Entire cities are besieged, basic food and water are cut off, and hospitals are just coming under direct attack.
And it gets worse. When humanitarian groups set up camps to receive people fleeing this extreme violence, they notice something genuinely terrifying. As this quote highlights, the levels of malnutrition are so unprecedented that many civilians are simply too sick or, tragically, already dead to even attempt the journey to safety. It's absolutely heartbreaking.
Moving to Section 2, Colonial Roots of Weaponized Identity. To understand exactly why this violence is happening and why it's so intensely targeted, we need to look back at how historical policies actually laid the foundation for today's ethnic divisions. You see, Sudan is incredibly diverse. It has over 500 ethnic groups. But as you can see in this comparison, there's a deep historical rift. British colonial rule formally sharpened the divisions between communities that identify as Arab and those that identify as African. And after independence, those divisions didn't just heal up, they were baked right into who got political and military power. Decades later, authoritarian ruler Omar al-Bashir, who was in charge for nearly 30 years, weaponized those exact identities. He favored Arab communities for top government positions while systematically marginalizing non-Arab African communities out in the more remote regions.
So, follow this timeline with me into the modern era. Back in 2003, marginalized non-Arab groups in Darfur rebelled. Bashir's response? He armed Arab militias known as the Janjaweed, which led to mass killings and millions displaced. But instead of dismantling them later on, in 2013, Bashir actually rebranded the Janjaweed into an official paramilitary force, the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. Fast forward to 2019, pro-democracy protests finally ousted Bashir, sparking this fragile hope for civilian rule. But that hope was totally crushed by a military coup in 2021, executed jointly by the National Army and the RSF. And finally, by 2023, unable to agree on how to share that stolen power, those two factions turned their guns on each other and total war erupted.
Which brings us to Section 3. Two generals, two rival capitals. That timeline of violence has fractured Sudan geographically, leaving the whole nation trapped between two men who absolutely refuse to share power.
Geopolitically, we are looking at a completely fractured reality. Sudan is effectively sliced in two right now. On one side, you have the Sudan Armed Forces, the SAF, led by General Burhan, operating mostly out of Port Sudan in the northeast. On the flip side, you have the RSF, led by Hemeti, controlling much of the west from Nyala. So we're looking at a country with two rival administrative capitals. And keep in mind, neither of these has any true democratic legitimacy. One was born from a military coup, and the other is literally built on a history of ethnic cleansing.
Looking at this geographical fracture, a pretty terrifying question emerges for political analysts. Is history about to repeat itself? Remember, in 2011, South Sudan broke away and became an independent state after decades of conflict. Today, observers are deeply concerned that this rigid split between Burhan's forces in the east and Hemeti's forces in the west is going to result in another permanent, incredibly violent tearing apart of the nation. Okay, Section 4, the RSF business conglomerate. Let's shift our focus specifically to the RSF and figure out how a paramilitary group sustains a nationwide military campaign of this scale.
You have to understand, the RSF is no longer just a militia riding on horseback like they were back in 2003. It has mutated,
Consolidated largely under Hemedti's family, the RSF has expanded into a massive, highly sophisticated conglomerate of business, security, and political interests. They actively exploit Sudan's natural resources to fund their operations. And that last bullet point, that's key. The current war started in 2023 precisely because the RSF fiercely refused demands to integrate into the national army. Doing so would mean giving up their independent corporate and military empire, and there was no way they were going to let that happen.
But the cost of protecting that paramilitary empire is just horrific. As the RSF advanced, especially in Darfur, a familiar and tragic pattern emerged. In the city of Al Janina alone, the UN estimates up to 15,000 people were killed. This violence specifically targeted the non-Arab Masalit ethnic group, featuring deliberate killings, torture, and mass displacement. In fact, in 2024, the United States officially declared that the RSF's actions against the Masalit constitute genocide.
So, Section 5, the Global Gold Smuggling Network. This raises a major logistical question. How exactly does a rogue conglomerate finance these massive operations when the official national army, the SAF, controls the regions with the country's oil wealth?
Well, the answer is blood gold. Tracing the exact supply chain keeping the RSF funded reveals three very distinct steps. Step 1. Hemedti's forces siphon massive amounts of gold from the territories they control. Step 2. They smuggle this gold out through a vast network across Sudan's 7 international borders. And Step 3. The gold is then absorbed and laundered into sophisticated foreign markets, with investigators frequently pointing to places like the United Arab Emirates. It is a highly organized, massively profitable extraction of the nation's wealth. And that leads us perfectly into Section 6, Foreign Powers Arming the Conflict. This is perhaps the most critical piece of our briefing, the external forces who are happily exchanging weapons for those stolen resources.
This table right here is absolutely crucial because it shows that this is no longer just a civil war, it's a global war economy. Both factions are being artificially sustained by outside powers. The Sudan armed forces are backed by Egypt, drawing arms from Egypt, Turkey, and Iran. On the flip side, despite their official denials, investigations trace weapons flowing to the RSF from the UAE, as well as Turkey, Russia, Serbia, and Yemen. Foreign powers are continuously supplying deadly arms to both sides, which allows the factions to keep fighting and allows the external powers to keep siphoning Sudan's riches.
Now, the crucial point here is legality, or rather, the total lack of it. Every single weapon flowing into the Darfur region from these foreign networks is a direct violation of international law. The 2004 UN arms embargo on Darfur explicitly prohibits the supply of arms to any warring parties in the region. Yet, as we've seen, the supply chain of weapons for gold just flows entirely unchecked.
Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Ultimately, as you digest the sheer human cost of this staggering war economy, the 25 million people facing starvation, the colonial divisions weaponized for greed, and the foreign powers eagerly exchanging guns for smuggled gold, we're left with a really provocative thought. How can civilians ever reclaim power, and how can the guns ever fall silent, when so many international actors are profiting immensely from the destruction of Sudan?